In the history of political theater, some moments are meticulously planned, while others are forged in the fire of genuine conviction. This is the story of how a simple lesson, father's promise, became a president's weapon, and in one televised instant, changed the national conversation. The air in the Oval Office was thick with the scent of old paper and fresh polish, a sterile backdrop for a memory so visceral. President Donald Trump stood not at the resolute desk, but by the tall windows, his gaze drifting somewhere beyond the South Lawn. Beside him stood his youngest son, Barron Toller, now than he'd ever imagined a quiet presence in the storm of his father's world. They weren't discussing policy or polls. They were talking about ghosts. "Your grandfather," the president said, his voice softer than the world had ever heard it. "Fred was a tough man, tough, but he told me something when I wasn't much older than you are now. We were at a site in Queens, mud up to our ankles. He grabbed my arm hard and said, 'Donald, all this,' he waved at the steel and concrete, 'this is just stuff. Your name on a contract, on a sign, your handshake with a subcontractor, that's all you really own. It's your bond.' He believed a man was his word, or he was nothing." Trump turned from the window, locking eyes with Barron. "They don't get that, these people. They think it's all just words." A knock at the door. It was Michael, his ever-present, ever-hurried aide. "Mr. President, it's time." The town hall. The president straightened his tie, the quiet moment of paternal reflection, snapping shut, replaced by the familiar armor of command. He was walking into an ambush, and he knew it. The stage, bathed in sterile blue light, had been set in a university gymnasium in Virginia, location chosen for its illusion of neutrality. Tension crackled in the air, a pressure the moderator's forced smiles couldn't ease. Opposite him stood Senator Elizabeth Warren, a coiled spring of academic fury, poised for this very moment. After the perfunctory opening questions, she struck. "Mr. President," she began, her voice laced with condescension, "let's talk about this new Vietnam Trade Pact. You stand here claiming to champion these people, yet you've signed a deal with provisions, specifically Annex 4B, Subsection C, that create loopholes for transshipment. You've effectively nullified the tariffs you claim protect American jobs. You sold them a promise and delivered a Trojan horse of globalist betrayal." She leaned back, triumphant, having constructed a trap of bureaucratic jargon meant to paint him as either ignorant or dishonest. The audience murmured, caught between confusion and concern. But the president didn't look at his notes. He didn't glance at an advisor. Instead, he looked past Warren, past the cameras, into the crowd, where he saw a man in a faded UAW jacket, a woman with hands worn raw from years of labor. He thought of his father's hands, calloused, strong, and in that moment, he knew exactly how to answer. When he spoke, the boom was gone, replaced by a raw, resonant timbre that cut through the room like a blade. "You know," he began. "I listened to the senator. I heard a lot of numbers and X's, subsections, very complicated, very smart, I'm sure." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "But I don't remember talking about Annex 4B on the campaign trail. I don't remember making a promise about subsection C." He stepped forward, his voice steady. "What I remember is standing in places like this in Michigan, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, and looking people in the eye. People who had lost everything. People from towns hollowed out because leaders in Washington made promises they never intended to keep. They gave a handshake with their fingers crossed behind their backs." He raised a finger not at the senator, but toward the air, as if punctuating a truth carved in stone. "My promise was simple. I told them I'd fight for them. I told them I'd put their jobs, their families, first. This deal, this piece of paper, is my handshake with the American worker. It's my name on the sign. It's my bond." Then he turned, locking eyes with Senator Warren. "You can call it a structural failure. You can hide behind your fancy words and your footnotes. But when I look a steelworker in the eye, he knows what I mean. My word is good. And that, Senator, is something you will never ever understand. The silence in the gymnasium was total thick, electric. It was broken not by applause, but by a single, heartfelt amen from the man in the UAW jacket. And then, the room erupted. This wasn't just a political win, it was a moral one. He hadn't just scored points. He had seized the narrative. He hadn't debated policy. He had defended his honor. The firestorm was instant and biblical in scale. Before the town hall had even concluded, the clip was everywhere. On social media, it went supernova memes spread like wildfire. Trump's face appeared on classic Western movie posters, with the caption, "A man's word, his father's lesson," retold and remixed, became legend. Cable news exploded. One network hailed it as the most authentic moment of his presidency, in piercing through political noise. Another seethed with outrage, condemning it as dangerous demagoguery and emotional sleight of hand that ignored the catastrophic reality of the policy. The backlash hit just as hard. Warren's supporters flooded the airwaves, calling him a charlatan, a snake oil salesman wrapping a flawed deal in the flag of his father's ghost. That phrase, his father's ghost, trended in mockery. But the true cost of the firestorm wouldn't be measured in retweets, memes, or cable news segments. The true cost was measured not in headlines or hashtags, but in the quiet, tense moments behind the White House walls. 2 days after the town hall, Michael stood before the Resolute desk, a grim expression etched across his face. In his hands was a thin red folder. "Sir, we need to talk about the inbound traffic," he said, opening it. Inside were printouts of emails and angry tapestry of hatred. Voicemail transcripts followed, voices warped by rage, some promising retribution. One message, from a blocked number, was chillingly specific, tailing the exact route of the motorcade to Andrews Air Force Base. The president read in silence, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching. He slid the folder back across the desk. "They're just noise." Michael started to protest angry people. Yes, but even his voice had lost its usual sharpness. He looked worn down. That evening, the weight pressed harder. Barron found his father alone in the residence, not watching TV, but sitting in front of a cold fireplace, staring into nothing. "Dad," he said quietly, "my friends, they've been seeing stuff online, the things people are saying." He didn't have to explain. The threats, the vitriol lit, was everywhere. "Are you okay?" The president looked at his son, not the tall young man, but the boy who used to hide behind the curtains in Trump Tower. He forced a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything's fine, son. It's a rough business. Always has been. Don't you worry." Barron nodded and left. As the door closed, the president's shoulders slumped. The armor was heavy. The public fight was exhilarating, but the private toll was a battle of wits and wills, but the fear he'd glimpsed in his own son's eyes the night before had revealed a different kind of war, a slow, grinding siege on his soul. The next day brought an unexpected shift. His private secretary buzzed through. "Sir, missed him earlier. Carlia Hahn is on the line for you." The president's eyebrows lifted. "I hand the legendary corporate raider, a man who'd been rival, ally, and adversary over 4 decades. They hadn't spoken in months." He picked up the phone. "Kay." The voice on the other end was gravelly, unmistakable. "Donald, I saw that thing the other night. That town hall." A beat of silence. "That was good stuff. Real stuff." Another pause. "These people, they don't have a code. But you reminded them, there's still a few of us who do. Watch your back, kid." The line went dead. The president held the receiver for a moment before gently setting it back in its cradle. A small, genuine smile, his first in days, touched his lips. A word of respect from an old gunslinger. Unexpected, unasked for. but it landed like a shield, a piece of armor he didn't know he needed. That evening, he found himself once again by the window, the weight a little lighter. Michael stood beside him, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The city lights shimmered beyond the window, a vast, indifferent galaxy. "They hate me for it, Michael," the president said, more to himself than to his aide. "They hate me because I won't play their game. I won't speak their language." Michael, ever the pragmatist, replied, "Sir, your approval's up 7 points with independence. They're calling it the handshake moment." The president shook his head. "It's not about the points. It's about the principle." His thoughts drifted to his father, the mud in Queens, the grip on his arm. This fight had cost him. It had brought danger to his doorstep and fear into his home. But standing there, watching the world turn outside, he knew it was worth it. He had taken a personal memory, a piece of his soul, and held it up as a standard. He refused to let his promise be buried under a mountain of bureaucratic jargon. He had made it personal, and in doing so, made it real for millions. Across the country, the ripple effect was undeniable. On factory floors, in coffee shops, around kitchen tables, the conversation had shifted. No one was arguing about Annex 4B anymore. They were asking something deeper. What do we really expect from our leaders? Is a promise just a campaign tool, a string of words to be twisted and forgotten? Or is it a bond? Is there still room for personal honor in the cold machinery of modern politics? The handshake moment didn't solve the nation's divisions, but it did something else. It reframed them. It asked whether the true divide in America is not between left and right, but between those who believe a person's word is sacred and those who see words as just another weapon. So what is the true measure of a leader's promise? Is it found in the fine print of a 1,000-page bill, or in the simple, unwavering conviction behind a handshake? Let us know what you think in the comments, and for more stories that define our times, don't forget to subscribe.